Our next speaker is our own Jerry Weisenfluh. He's our Interim Director at KGS. Aaron spoke mostly about the demand side of the coal business. Jerry's going to talk about the supply side and talk a little bit about remaining coal resources in Kentucky.
Thank you. I was really glad Aaron gave you the bad news, so I get to talk a little bit about the good news about coal resources. And most of the analyses that you've probably all read about, all mention the factors that may be impacting what's going on in Kentucky now, and they focus on the regulatory environment, and they focus on the shale gas, the cost of gas and its stability that impacts fuel switching. And most people agree that both of those are really important factors. And usually, what's tacked on at the end of those analyses are, oh, and by the way, Kentucky's coal resources are probably depleted anyways. So I want to talk a little bit today about that last question and my perspective about the volume of coal that may be remaining in Kentucky. I'm not going to address coal quality, and I'm not going to address the mineability of those coals. That's really beyond the time that I've got here, but I want to show you what we think in terms of how much coal is available. And I'm going to talk about both coal fields, eastern and western Kentucky coal fields. You've already heard about distinct differences in production between those two regions. I'll start with eastern Kentucky. This is a stratigraphic column that shows the distribution of coals that I'm going to be talking about. And this very lower part are coals that primarily occur down in far southeastern Kentucky. They potentially have the widest extent of coals because they're the lowest in the stratigraphic section. But I'll show later that they don't have that wide a distribution. So I'm going to talk about what we know about these coals. These coals are primarily at and below drainage. That means they're primarily underground resources with smaller amounts of surface availability. That's where most of the production in Kentucky has historically come from. I'm not going to talk about these uppermost coals, the hazard coals that are largely surface mined in eastern Kentucky, and the Princess Coals in far northeastern Kentucky. So I'm going to focus on these at and below range coals that really constitute most of the resource in that region. Every map I'm going to show you has the same legend in terms of coal thickness. And what I want you to remember is that what I'm going to be tabulating are resources that are greater than 20 inches in thickness. This orange color is a lot of coal that's being mined today. So we're talking 30-inch coal in that particular category. 42 and inch greater are the green and red colors. So just keep those colors in mind because I'm going to go through these maps pretty quickly in order to get through everything that I need to say this morning. Any color that's in gray or yellow, there's coal in the ground there, but it's probably not of sufficient thickness to be mined with current technology. So I'm not going to tabulate those resources. So this is kind of a sense of those coals in the lowest part of the section are predominantly located in this very southeastern corner of Kentucky and into Virginia. So they don't have very wide extent. I'm going to show you what those coal bodies look like. This is the splash dam. This is the lowest seam in the interval. Splash dam seam has these 3 coal bodies. The blue are areas that are already mined out. So you can see there's some remaining coal here adjacent to those existing mine areas, very little down here. I calculated about 39 million tons only for the remaining resource in the splash dam in southeastern Pike County. The next seam is called the Haggy. Very similar situation. There's several discrete coal bodies. Most of the mining is taking place down here. There are several small coal bodies that have about 79 million short tons of remaining resource for that coal. The Glamorgan seam, again, very isolated, small pods of coal in Pike County. Many of them have experienced some mining here, 141 million tons of remaining resources for that bed. And then the Clintwood seam, some people may know it as the Bingham seam. It's the first coal bed in our stratigraphic section in eastern Kentucky that has regional extent. So that there are probably coals that exist throughout the eastern Kentucky coal field, but there's only 3 or 4 areas that have significant development of thickness that is capable of being mined. So it's been extensively mined in Pike County, and then this is the Manchester seam here, and there's enhanced development down here. So you can see that those have been developed quite a bit. The remaining coal along the margins of those mined areas is calculated about 275 million tons. So what you're seeing here is we go stratigraphically upward, the areas get slightly larger, so the remaining resources incrementally increase as we go stratigraphically upward. But if you take those 4 principal beds in that lower part of the section, I'm calculating about 500 million short tons of coal that are remaining. It's a relatively small amount of coal. You know, if we were to focus on producing that coal at 50 million tons a year, we could dispatch with that pretty quickly. So that's not a lot of coal. And I'm going to talk really about these more extensive coal beds, beginning with the lower Elkhorn. So again, its distribution is much wider. It's a basin-wide coal. Most of these maps, the original maps I'm going to show where the greater than 28-inch thickness coal originally occurred. So this is a Pike County resource, but also down here in the Upper Cumberland Basin. And this area down here is what they call blue gem. Most people have heard about the high-quality blue gem coal that was used in the steel industry. So that's the original extent of the deposits. There's the Pike County area. You can see that is very heavily depleted. So the blue areas have been mined out. These were active mines at the time I made this slide. I'm not sure there's much activity there now. So you can see what we have there is some peripheral areas adjacent to those mines. But those areas, because the size of the geographic area is much larger than the earlier maps, and we're still tabulating about 1 billion tons of remaining coal for the lower Elkhorn. This is one of the most important resources that we had in eastern Kentucky. Very high quality, had metallurgical properties, but also could be used in the steel market as well, or in the electric utility market as well. So 1 billion tons in counting. This is that same equivalent coal bed in the Upper Cumberland Basin, and there's quite a bit of remaining coal. A lot of that 1 billion tons is probably located down there in Harlan County. And then there are blue gem resources left. It's very thin coal, very difficult to mine. So all total, between those 3 areas, 1 billion tons. Next coal bed stratigraphically higher is the Upper Elkhorn number 2. Here's the extent of the greater than 28-inch coal. Again, it's a Pike County resource. And there's the extent of mining to date. These are 2014 mine dates, by the way. There's been some mining since that time. So extensively developed in the southwestern part of that reserve, but a lot of the northeastern part remains to be mined. And the dark orange color is technically recoverable using today's technology. So I'm calculating, again, very close to another 1 billion tons of remaining coal in that Upper Elkhorn number 2 coal bed. Upper Elkhorn number 3, you see the extent of the 28-inch coal is now starting to increase into the basin. So we have Pike County, Floyd, all the way up into Martin County, and Leslie County, and in the Upper Cumberland. So the Elkhorn 3 had a much wider distribution originally. Here's the area north of the Pine Mountain Fall. So it's very heavily developed down here and through this area, but again, there are remaining resources on the peripheral margins of those coal bodies. And as well, in the Upper Elkhorn area, it's called the Kellyoka seam there, and there's a very closely related seam called the Darby. There's quite a bit of remaining resource adjacent to the existing mines, in the Harlan County area as well. And another coal body in this area right here, Letcher County and Perry and Leslie County. So for the Upper Elkhorn 3, I'm calculating about 1.8 billion tons of remaining resources. Fire clay coal, again, one of the most important resources in eastern Kentucky, very high quality in terms of sulfur content and heating value. It's been used extensively in the electric utility industry. The original extent, again, further into the basin, and the reason that it's not showing up here in Pike County is because it was eroded, so there really was no potential for, it probably existed there originally, but no longer. The main coal body is down here in this area. There's the extent of mining. That's a very heavily mined coal bed. It's one of our leading producers historically through time. The peripheral areas of those coal bodies, though, tabulate another 1 billion short tons of remaining coal. So, in summary, for these at and below drainage coals, I'm calculating about 6.3 billion short tons of remaining resources that are technically feasible to recover. And whether they have the sufficient qualities and whether they are economically recoverable in the marketplace is a whole other question. But that volume of coal is nearly comparable to all the coal that we've mined in Kentucky to date. To get put in perspective what we have remaining just in the beds below drainage. So we've got at least 7 billion short tons in eastern Kentucky of remaining coal. They're high quality. The very lowest coals are very high quality. They can be used in specialty markets and they can be used in the metallurgical market, but they're limited in distribution and tonnage. The 42-inch greater coal is largely depleted in Kentucky, and much of the remaining coal is below drainage and it's going to be accessible by underground mine methods. Western Kentucky is a very different situation as far as coal. The first thing is there are fewer beds, and most of the historical mining is only taking place in 3 of the beds in eastern Kentucky. And those are 3 I'm going to talk about today: the Springfield coal, the Heron coal, and the Baker coal. And that's where most of the mining is taking place. And so here's a map of the Springfield coal in western Kentucky. The green are fault systems, the Rough Creek fault system. Most of the mining is taking place down here in the southwestern part of the basin where it comes near the surface. Ohio River up here, and there's some big mines up here north of the Rough Creek as well. But you can see that almost the entire basin has coal of sufficient thickness to be mined using current technology and anything we can conceive. It's one of the most widespread coal beds in Kentucky. At one coal bed, I calculate 6.7 billion tons of remaining resources in western Kentucky. It's one of our principal producers right now in the region. The Heron has very different distribution. They have very distinct bodies of coal. One down here in the southern part of the basin, several down in this area, and then one large area mostly north of the Rough Creek fault system. Again, heavily depleted down here in the south, large area surface mines. In the early part of the history, current underground mining, and then a lot of active mining is taking place up here now and some of these areas. But again, the remaining resource there, because of the size of the area, calculated 2.3 billion short tons. And then the third theme is what we call the Baker, the Western Kentucky number 13. Again, it's a very complicated coal bed relative to the Springfield in particular, and even compared to the Heron. It has benches, the benches split. It's more like an eastern Kentucky coal in terms of its morphology, more difficult to mine. Several distinct coal bodies, a big one here, another one here, separated by a no coal area, and then a large coal body up here in the northern part of the coal field. Again, the peripheral areas of those coal bodies tabulate 2.5 billion tons of remaining coal. So this is the total summary. So Eastern Kentucky, 7 billion tons at least of remaining resources. These are not the same resources that we mined in the past. They have different thickness characteristics. They're more complex in terms of recoverabilities and ground control. So these are difficult to mine. They're expensive to mine. As we've seen, the demand for that low sulfur, high quality coal is declining in today's marketplace. But we do have access to metallurgical and specialty markets that could show potential for those resources down the road. In Western Kentucky, we show at least 11.5 billion tons of remaining coal in just 3 of the coal beds over there. There are some beds there that have significant resources with very little mining. I didn't tabulate it, but would probably at least double that figure. So there's an immense amount of coal remaining in Western Kentucky. We have greater demand for that coal now because it's cheaper to mine, and it doesn't, and as Aaron pointed out, there is technology to remove the sulfur at the power plant site. Those beds are deeper than what has been historically mined, so there are ground control challenges to recovering that economically. But as we've seen, there's a bright future for Western Kentucky coal that we didn't see 10 years ago. So it's very good news for the state. So that is sort of my assessment of the remaining coal resources in Kentucky. And I agree with Secretary Snavely that technology really is the big question as far as I'm concerned. 10, 15 years ago, I was making the prediction that surface mining was going to be over in eastern Kentucky. And then these large area surface mine, multi-seam surface mines, that benefited from new technology, basically proved me wrong. So I think there's a long history to coal that could be impacted by future technology. Thank you.